Welcome to what happened on Saturday with Marlon Turner. Marlon, how you doing?
Josh, I'm good. I hope you had a great night trick-or-treating
Sure
with your
did.
kids.
Sure did. It's prime time for my two 10-year-old boys. This is their peak Halloween. They're in the they're in they're the prime of their Halloween careers. They went as inflatable SpongeBob and inflatable Patrick,
Oh, nice.
which were two nightmare costumes that they took off after about 15 minutes. So that was not $100 well spent if it's you figure they're 50 each.
Right.
Because they were done with them in
Yeah.
about 10 minutes. So
But the
yeah,
bigger
we
question is how much candy did they get?
too much, too much. One was up till 2:30 in the morning, so
And
he
then did you take
ingested.
it and eat it?
I took it and hid it. I hid it,
Ah,
and it's in the same hiding spot as a lot of their Christmas presents already are. So hopefully they don't find either one. And the dogs are the biggest narc when it comes to that because the dogs have a way of sniffing that out. I want to
absolutely.
ask you a question. How you feeling with your Buckeyes atop the college football playoff rankings? A, was that a surprise to you? And B, what was your reaction when you saw it?
Not so much of a surprise, just because it's the first ranking and they generally will go by who has the most top 10 victories against top 10 teams or top 25 teams. And when you look at it, Ohio State had two top 10 victories and nobody else has two top 10 victories on their schedule yet. Georgia will definitely get that on the back half of their schedule. Alabama will have the chance to do that as well. And you still have Ohio State, Michigan coming. So it didn't shock me. I thought they may stick with Georgia still being number one, and I figured Ohio State would be two, and then Michigan would either be three, even possibly four, just based off of the fact that as of now, when you look at their schedule, the back half of their schedule sets up where they have their tougher opponents. So I could see an argument of people trying to say, well, they shouldn't be up there, but yeah, they're still pretty good a football team, and I know we're going to talk about some of the stuff that
Yeah.
they're in,
Well, and
but
you're being
it
very
didn't shock
kind.
me.
You're being very kind to your rivals, saying that their schedule has tougher opponents during the second half of the season. I'd argue that their second half of the season has a tough opponent because I still don't think they've played a tough opponent. We're going to get into all that other stuff. I'm no
They've
curious your
got Penn
thoughts.
State coming up, so I mean
Well,
that's going to be their setup.
sure.
Like that, Penn State, and then pretty much Michigan State is a wash this year. Generally, the Big Ten. Normally, you're going to have your Ohio State, your Michigan, and then if your Penn State and Michigan State's good, and you'll sneak in an occasional Iowa. That's going to be really good one year, or Northwestern, or even sometimes Illinois. Those are kind of the teams that'll kind of fluctuate as being we're going to have a really good football season this year. But this year is just a down year for those teams. Penn State is still really trying to figure out offensively what their identity is. We know they like to run the ball, but they don't like to throw the ball deep. I don't know if that's they don't have confidence in their young quarterback or they just don't want to put him in situations that will cost them the games and really ruin his confidence and his ability, because that's the thing about young quarterbacks. You really have to make sure you protect their psyche. So I would trust that coaching staff and that brain trust kind of knows what they're trying to do, and they have a really good defense. So why
Yep.
turn the ball over when you know your defense is going to be pretty good?
James Franklin is another one of those coaches that I always view as a guy who can't wait to kick the ball. That's just my personal opinion. I just feel like some coaches are happy enough with a punt on every possession, which I understand the thinking, and obviously your
Yeah.
personnel matters quite a bit. But it's they're a tough watch sometimes. Let's go down to just do a quick rundown of the lower teams because that will give us some narratives in the college football season here that
Right.
aren't only the top four. Coming in at number 25 are my Air Force Falcons. I've been on
Looking
them for a
good.
few weeks now. Their defense is legit. Like their
Yes.
defense, I feel like hard to know because of the level of competition. They look the part. They look really athletic. They look big. They look like a top 25 defense to me. Obviously, their offense is what it is, and they play complementary football, which is one of our favorite phrases on this show. They need
Yes.
to. They
They
need
have
to,
to.
and
Yes, they
they
have
have
to.
to. They're smart. They're disciplined. All the things you'd expect from a military academy. This is one of the best military academy schools teams that I've seen in a long time. And they just, I
Absolutely.
guess, to me, they just look different than maybe a good Army or a good Navy team, which always looks undersized. This team doesn't look undersized to me.
No, they don't look so much undersized, and I think to your point, they play smart complementary football. So they're not going to do anything to put themselves in bad positions. They don't get outflanked. They don't get out of position. They play very very disciplined football, and I think that's kind of always been what has been a downfall for most of the military teams, right? We know talent-wise, sometimes they're not going to stack up with some of the bigger schools that they might go against. But when they don't beat themselves, now it puts the onus back on the team that says, well, we should beat them. Like we have more talent, we have the size. And so now if it's one-on-one and we can match up, they're winning their battles. But again, it's playing smart football. It's not turning the ball over in their territory, giving short fields. That they're making teams really, really work. And with the way their offense plays, they can grind the clock out. And with the new college rules, now that the way they can grind out and keep possessions going, now
Yeah.
it takes possessions away from teams. So even if you're an explosive team playing a Air Force and the way they run it and the way they can do so many different things, they're chewing up the clock. And so now you don't have as many possessions. So then you get a little bit more tight. So they've been doing a really good job with the new rules, but definitely it is not the same academy type of schools that we've seen in the past where they'll get up and then they'll blow the lead because they gave up this. They turned the ball over in their territory. They gave up a deep bomb on a 3rd and 15. They've been very disciplined and very solid. So they should I thought probably would be a little higher, but again, when you look at strength of schedule and who they played,
Yeah.
you can make the argument that they haven't beaten anybody yet, but I think they'll get their chance soon.
Right. I sure hope so. Did you ever I don't believe you played a service academy when you were at Ohio State. Did you ever play a team where you knew they were going to run the ball 70, 80, 90% of the time? Probably Wisconsin was the closest, or Iowa back then. Like was there a game you knew you had to strap it on?
Wisconsin was going to run the ball a lot. Illinois liked to run the ball a lot. It just depends. Like I came up in that Big Ten era where, big tight ends, big 2 tight end formations, and you're going to run the ball. And, we had to hit Mike Alstott a few times. So there were plenty of teams that we knew that was going to try to run the ball on us. And then you might play some teams that's going to spread it out. But it's not like it is now. Like the way we go 4 and 5 wides, that was not a staple of what people put in their college offense back when I played. That was considered run and shoot. And the only team that really did that was like Houston.
Okay. Yeah. Andre Ware, right?
Andre Ware. Yeah.
Andre Ware. Yeah. So the Air Force defense, do you think the Air Force scout team, do you think they run like traditional offense, or do they still run the triple option at practice?
I think when you talk about scout team, you're going to go and create the offensive plays and the game plan based off of who you're facing. So those guys, again, think about it like that, right? Like it's not the same traditional offense that you're seeing. So they're out doing some things that maybe they're not accustomed to running their option style offense. So yeah, so again, those guys are smart, they're intelligent. Coaches, kudos to the coaching staff because they're really putting them in the right situations, and they seem very prepared. I think that's the other thing that you notice about the team. They seem prepared. Nothing phases them. They don't seem like they're getting caught off guard. Whereas before, you're like, I haven't seen it. How do we line up? There was sometimes some confusion on this. I go here. This linebacker goes here. No, this person should be lining here. And then they snap the ball and they give up a big run or a big play. They are very well versed to what they can expect to see from their opponents, and they line up to get ready. They get set quickly. So those are things that just when you look at a mark of a good team, they're a good football team, and hopefully they just continue to win and they keep rising up.
They play Army on Saturday, and one of those games there should be probably less than 5 forward passes. It's gonna be like 19-20. But I'll at least check in on them. As you go up the rankings here, some of the more interesting names. Number 19, UCLA. They really kind of put it to Colorado, and I felt like this was the game where not that Colorado was exposed, but man, UCLA was physical with them, and they kind of just bullied them. They ran the ball. Colorado had a couple of turnovers to keep them in the game, but you just watch that game physically, and it's like we've talked about with Colorado all year. Their lines just weren't going to hold up against UCLA.
Their line couldn't hold up, and that's the biggest thing. And not to focus away from UCLA. But, we talked about what Deion was able to do early in the season. And you look at those things of what we wanted and expected from Colorado was just to be bowl eligible. Now, it's going to be a hard stretch for them to become bowl eligible. So that early success early in the season is now showing that they needed to really, some of the games they lost, they needed to really come back and get those victories because it's going to come back and bite them. And their season looks like it's going to end as soon as they play their last game. But then you flip it to UCLA because that was a question mark. What is UCLA going to look like? Historically, they've been overmatched by their opponents, but they were very physical against Colorado. They ran the ball and they played good defense. That was kind of the thing that they gave up a lot of points. And in games, they have given up some points to some opponents, but they played very well. They got the ball from Colorado when they uncharacteristically made some mistakes and some turnovers, but definitely this is a different UCLA team, and they have some games. They can be spoilers. They have some games coming up on their schedule that sets up nice for them as well. And so, not saying that they're 6-2, but they could knock off, a Washington. They can come in and knock off, somebody like a Utah,
Oregon.
like that's gonna be, or even an Oregon, right? So
Yep.
those are the things when you're looking at, like, wait a minute, like, what does this look like? Because when you think about what they have, they've got Arizona State, USC, so they can knock off USC. So that's kind of the only one, and they've got Cal. They can knock off because they've already lost.
And they can make the Pac-12. They can make the Pac-12 championship game still.
Yeah, they can make that. So that's what you're looking at. Like, all right, wait a minute, here we go. What can we do? Can we be spoilers? So you never know.
I feel like they're going to be a program. I was thinking about them watching that game. I feel like the move to the Big Ten is going to be good for them. Like, it's weird to say that a high-profile Los Angeles team is kind of under the radar, but like you talked about, they're the second team in their own market. But once you get to UCLA, Michigan, UCLA, Ohio State, and the Rose Bowl, those are going to be marquee games. Like, it feels like their visibility. If I was going to buy stock in like one team in this new realignment, it might be UCLA, just because I think that their profile is going to be raised quite a bit by, where they play and who they are, who their coach is. I think he's, done a pretty good job there in a name, but you don't see him play very often. It's always buried late at night on Pac-12 after dark and all that nonsense. Like, I feel like going forward, the profile of that program is going to be raised quite a bit.
Right. Yep. Their profile will definitely go. And I think their style of play may transition a lot quickly, or more quickly than what people will anticipate. So you're still going to have to go up against, the quote unquote big guns, but they've shown that they can play in some hostile environments. They've shown that their O-line can match up. And that's where Colorado, when we talk about them, they've got to get a lot better in the trenches, because that's the name of the game. Can you control the line of scrimmage on both sides and in both facets of offense and defense? And they can't. And that's what's limiting them. It's not like they don't have the skill players. They just can't protect the quarterback, and they can't stop the run. And they have to blitz to bring pressure. Now, Travis Hunter had a really good game. He had some turnovers in that game and some interceptions. But at the end of the day, you can't rely on your secondary to come up with enough plays to make it. And I think there was this really one controversial play when we talk about it, because I grew up in the era where you got the hit. Shiloh,
was that clean?
That was a clean hit. That's what you've been coached. That's what you taught. He didn't purposely try to make contact with the neck area. He dipped his shoulder. He came through on the chest. He came high. This is what they were trying to clean up the game as far as going low. And now you're teaching guys, like, if I'm going to get ejected, I might as well just go low at the kneecap. So they've got to fix that, because it would be a textbook tackle in my play of how you want to come in on a big guy. It wasn't a kill shot. You didn't run through him. It wasn't a hit on a defensive receiver. Again, I don't know how that was called targeting, but you got to live with it. That the refs are human; they make mistakes too. So whoever made that call from their eyesight and from how they interpreted the rule, they called it targeting and they ejected him. But again, when you look at it as a former player, that's not what I would consider targeting.
I could have done without the flex. You could have done without the flex.
You could have done the whole, like, hey, you know what? That's taunting, right? Like, and you can clean that up as a ref. Like, I'm not going to tolerate that. But to sit up there and say, hey, you led with, like, no, you didn't. He did. He put his shoulder into him. That was one of those things where I'm like, I don't know. Like, we've got to fix that. And I think I guess I can't say the NCAA will fix it.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Hopefully the Big Ten will kind of institute some rules. You got to leave it to the conferences and say, we have to clean this up and make sure it doesn't happen again.
That's funny. All right. So we're gonna take a detour here for a couple minutes, and we're gonna let me rant a bit. Number 15 is Notre Dame, and number 13 is Louisville, kind of grouped together. And the first thing I thought of when Ohio State was number one was, oh man, the committee obviously values the win against Notre Dame quite a bit. And it made me think, boy, if they would have just beaten Louisville, they would be in the position now where if they'd win out, they'd have a legitimate shot at the top four, because, they would have still lost the Ohio State game, but that's as close of a game as you can get. Last play of the game, all that.
Right.
And you could see how much the committee values Notre Dame. So the first thing I thought of when Ohio State was number one was, oh, God, that stupid Louisville game. And Notre Dame absolutely put the wood to Pittsburgh. I texted you, Chris Tyree had an unbelievable punt return
Yeah,
in the
he
first
did.
quarter to score. You know, this team feels a little bit different. Their defense is really physical, and they finally now have the athletes on the back end. Notre Dame's always had, you know, good linebacking play, you know, even going back
Right.
to like Lou Holtz and when you were in college. They've always had good linebackers. Their secondary, they had Jeff Burris, you know, who we had on the show. They've always had, you know, some guys, but it feels like now their secondary's finally athletic enough to maybe match up. Clearly, they matched up well against Ohio State. You know,
They matched up well, yeah.
you know, so that's the difference. I think you know, Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens, who's the secondary coach. Like, I feel like they've finally amassed a defense that is playoff worthy. The frustrating part is that the offense was let down by a lack of playmakers and a whole bunch of stuff. So I kind of hate watched that Notre Dame Pittsburgh game because the better Notre Dame played. I'm like, man, we really could make some noise if we wouldn't have, you know, stubbed our toe. We go to Clemson this week, which is weird because that was always the third game on, you know,
Right.
circled on the schedule. It's at noon. It's at noon in Clemson, and it's like we're gonna probably get like the ABC crew calling the game, and there's no buzz, there's no excitement,
Yeah,
and
no buzz,
Just
but y'all got to
Clemson's a
win this
mess.
game.
Clemson's a
Clemson's a mess. They're
mess.
not playing well on offense or defense, and you have down years. I think that it's so hard now with the parity in college football, with the transfer portals, NIL that's out there. It's really made it so that players can really go and say, okay, I came here expecting to play now and getting the opportunity to showcase what I can do, and you're not going to play me because NIL now has made it so that guys have incentives to play a lot and be able to do certain things on the offensive defensive side of the field. And when it doesn't happen, you're like, you're costing me money. You're costing
Yeah.
me this contract. So they've got to go and seek other opportunity, for lack of a better term. It's like free agency for college football.
Well, you know, Clemson, Dabo, he famously doesn't really believe in NIL and in the transfer portal, which isn't going to fly. Like, I mean, it's not going to fly long term. You can tell, like, the decline of Clemson seems to parallel the rise of the transfer portal and the fact that it doesn't really embrace it. He also made the wrong decision on a quarterback. He let DJ Uyunglele leave and go to Oregon State, and he's played really well. And his guy, Cade Klubnik, is just, to me, not the answer. So you kind of bet on the wrong quarterback there. And when you're not willing to kind of move with the times, like we've talked about with some of these, you know, with Dion and some of the younger coaches, Dabo kind of feels like antiquated at this point, right? It's like maybe it's passed him by. He's you know, he's kind of stubborn and a little quirky and weird. And I don't know if I'd want to go play for Dabo. I don't know.
It's just different. Like, why would you go there? The attraction to go to Clemson is because you win and you're going to be playing for ACC championships. When that doesn't happen, it's, why would I go there? Why would I go and play at any school for that matter when you're not going to be competitive? And now you have the ability to pretty much go to a school for a year, leave, and go back and go play and the following season. So it's going to be interesting. You're right. I would say his approach is antiquated. And so that's where you're hoping that he has a really good inner circle to say, listen, times are changing. You know, we talk about what it looked like and what Dion was doing and why people disliked how Dion approached the game. But I think Dion was ahead of some of the guys that have been there for a while because times are different and you have to have a different approach. Change is inevitable, but change is hard. And so sometimes the quote unquote, I'll put the air quotes up, the dinosaurs are the ones who become the late adopters, right? The late adapters, so to speak. And so it's just going to be, will he adapt and say, okay, you're right, I've got to kind of look at how I do it and approach this differently? Or will he be, I'm almost on the last leg of this contract, and the board of trustees like, you either better figure it out and change it, or do they kind of say you need to ride off into the sunset and we're going to get a younger coach who can understand how to relate to players and then understand how to navigate this type of college football in the climate that we have now?
Yeah, it feels like to me, you know, my really close friend Pat, who will be a listener of the show, he's a professor at Syracuse University and a big fan of Syracuse basketball. It's kind of how Jim Boeheim became. You know, he was older, set in his ways, been in the same program for 45 years. His way worked. It was the Boeheim way, but that stopped working. You know, it stopped working, and he got kind of old and crabby, and Dabo's kind of going down that road to me of like old grandpa yelling at, do you remember him saying earlier this year, maybe we need to lose some more games so some people jump off the bandwagon? Like, what a weird ass thing to say.
That's that's weird.
They're 4-4, so they're definitely making that happen.
And people are jumping off the bandwagon.
Yeah, right. Yes, so as we go up the rankings here, it feels like you kind of get into the area now after the 2-loss teams, like LSU and Notre Dame are the top 2-loss teams. And it feels like that's kind of the cutoff as to where those teams probably have no realistic path to actually making the top 4. But next year, that's the cutoff of where the college football playoff is going to be. And man, I can't wait for that, because this Notre Dame game on Saturday would have so much meaning, having us be 15th. And so I think it's going to be so good for college football to have so many more games still mean something, because I'm looking at bowl projections, Marlon, and we're going in between. Literally, there's something called the Pop-Tart Bowl now. Okay? So it's like they could play Alabama in the Peach Bowl, or they could go to the Pop-Tart Bowl. I don't even know where that is. We're going to have to figure that out.
I'm going to have to figure that one out. We'll talk about I love a good Pop-Tart with sprinkles. Cherry or strawberry with sprinkles, okay?
But, man, after a 12-game season, if I'm 10-2, do I really want to go play Oklahoma State in the Pop-Tart Bowl? Like, I'm sorry, that doesn't move the needle for me.
You do.
Okay, well,
you still want to go to a bowl game because of just you still get to play, you still get to showcase, you still get to do all those things. And again, you're building a foundation for next year. So while there'll be guys that'll say, I'm going to the next level and I'm not going to play in this bowl game, and they're going to make that decision for professional reasons of, hey, I can't risk the injury. Anybody that's young is like, I want to play. I want to have tape out there. I want to have film. Like, especially if you plan on going into the transfer portal as well, you need to be able to have something on tape to say, this is why you should take me. This is why you should let me come there. So yeah, it's important for some of those young guys, but I understand where you're coming from. It's just, it doesn't have the same appeal. Doesn't have the same appeal as a college football playoff game.
Right, of course. Color me just kind of unexcited about the Pop-Tart Bowl. So we got Penn State at number 11, and you could still see a path where if they beat Michigan and then maybe Michigan beats Ohio State, I don't know how the 3-team tiebreaker would work, but there's a possibility that Penn State could still sneak in there. Ole Miss is at number 10, and they're, like, to me, completely under the radar.
They are flying under the radar, and that's
Lane
what
Kiffin's done a really good job
and win games. That's it. You just want to win the games, and they're doing their job, and they're going to have a nice little back end of the schedule to set up too. So it's going to be really interesting for them. Can they go ahead and run the table and then win the SEC championship? Because still got to knock off Georgia. It still goes through there.
Number 9. So we got to talk about Oklahoma. Last week, they lose to Kansas. That was a weird game. Kansas gets out 14-0, and then there's a weather delay. And then immediately Oklahoma comes back, and I think they scored 21 in a row. And it looked like, oh, man, there's nobody in the crowd. Like, the crowd completely scattered. It went from this raucous Kansas home field. You're up 14-0. The weather delay happens. Oklahoma just runs the ball right down their throat for like over a quarter. It's 21-14, and you're like, okay, Oklahoma's just going to kind of roll here. And then it just kind of got away from them. And our guy, Lance Leopold, again, I'm just like, to me, he's like the coach of the year in college football. You're winning at Kansas, and you're consistently winning at Kansas. And I think that's almost an impossible thing to do.
It is. I mean, and that's where, you think about it like, okay, how is that a jump? It's a jump from coming from UB to go to Kansas, because now you're in a major conference. You're able to recruit and do some things, but he's got those guys believing, and they play very well. And we look at how they lost to Texas. I'm like, man, I thought this was going to be that shootout game. No, they came up and said, okay, listen, we lost to Texas. We're going to come in. I believe he had kind of a meeting with the team and said, hey, we're not going the way we thought it was going to go, but let's kind of regroup. Let's get refocused. And they came back and they played lights out against Oklahoma. And it goes to show you can't take, and I'm not going to say Oklahoma took them for granted, but you can kind of tell they're like, okay, listen, this is where it's supposed to be. We should beat them. They should be on the same field. And that is not what Kansas believed. Kansas was like, you know what? We belong here. We're going to beat you. And they went toe to toe. And it seemed like every time Oklahoma had an answer, Kansas had one right back for them. And so that's what won the game for them. They were just, you know what? We belong here. We believe we should be here. And we talk about the anatomy of an upset, right? Like you've got to have the team believing that you can do it. And then you have a weather delay, so that does change, and the mental psyche that it takes to get up for a game, and then you have to wait, and you don't know how long it's going to take, and so some people handle that better than others. But definitely Kansas was prepared. They came out like, all right, you know what? We may lose. Hey, let's regroup. We can do this. And they came back and played lights out in that
Backup
second
quarterback
half and
too.
won it with a minute left in the game. Like
Yeah.
they went down the field. I'm like, this is amazing. Like this was an
Yeah.
awesome game to watch. So yeah,
I'm gonna make
Kansas is a spoiler right now.
I'm gonna make a bold prediction to you. So Oklahoma plays at Oklahoma State. It's the Bedlam game. It's the
Yep.
last one, which is kind of sad if you think about it, because Oklahoma's moving to the SEC next year. I think, as we talked about UCLA benefiting from moving, I'm gonna say, like, if I had to pick one team or one brand that's gonna lose, I feel like
Yes.
Oklahoma going to the SEC. They're not going to be, that they in Texas have feasted on the Big 12. They're the biggest high-profile programs in the Big 12. It's like the two big dogs and then the 10 little dogs in the Big 12. And now they're just going to be one of 8 high-profile teams in the SEC. And Brett Venables doesn't move the needle for me as a coach. Like, I don't know what's going to make them stand out anymore once they go to the SEC with Texas and play Alabama and Tennessee and Georgia and Auburn and LSU. Like, I feel like they're gonna lose, some of their high profile status.
Absolutely.
I almost wonder why. Obviously, money is why you do it.
Money,
but man,
it's you get the harder non-conference schedule, right? So you get the benefit of, if I lose early, I still have some really good teams that I have to go and beat. But you're right, the SEC is a little different, and they're known for playing a different style and a different brand of football than what we've seen Texas play. And now all of a sudden, you're going from a team who struggles at times. Like that was a knock on the Big 12. Like, do they play defense in that conference? And you're going to a conference that's known for having some really good, not only offensive teams, but teams that play really good, stout defense, strong, stout up at the offensive line and the D line that can cause some issues. And now you've got to go in there and say, I'm playing teams like this from top to bottom that has guys that could be first round draft picks from the defensive line and offensive line. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I agree. I think they're the ones who really will have the biggest adjustment, kind of like when Texas A&M went to the SEC, and you're like, okay, like this made no sense. And they got shellacked for a while, and even Missouri when they struggled trying to get there and figure it out. And they had some success years ago, but they just haven't been able to figure out that right recipe of how do you recruit where you are and how do you change your style of offense to make it fit SEC style football.
Yeah, Missouri is a perfect example, and I guess I just fear that Oklahoma might go the way of Missouri and just be, kind of nondescript and like the 7th best team in the SEC, which there's no shame in that, but they're the second best or the first best team in the Big 12. So I just thinking about those two things, I feel like that's going to be a challenge. Number 8 is Alabama, and this is one of my favorite games of the year. Every year, it's the first Saturday in November. They always play they play LSU either home or away, and I always enjoy that CBS puts this as a 7:45 game. In the past, these were like the games of the year, the game of the century. It's not 1 versus 2 this time. This feels like one of those games. It's another one of those times, Marlon, where I find myself I'm going to have to root for Alabama because they're playing.
I'm going to root for Alabama. I can't.
Yeah,
I'm not a Brian. I'm not gonna say I can't stand because I have never met Brian Kelly, but
you can. No, you can.
I'm just not a fan of his style of football, and I'm sorry if there's any Brian Kelly fans listening. Nothing.
There's not many left. There's not many left. His style.
That's not a style of his style of his coaching style and
his communication style sucks. Frankly,
that's it for me. I'm good. Like I would definitely root for Alabama, but that was one of the teams we talked about, right? That had the early loss to Texas, and then first time being out of the top 10 since 2015. But that was also the year that they won a national championship, and their conference and their schedule set them up to if you just take care of business and win, then you can put yourself in a position that you want to be able to control your destiny. They can run the table and get to the SEC championship and be that one-loss team that is in the college football playoff. And they're playing really good defense, and they're kind of figuring out an offense. They're young quarterback. They're not asking him to do certain things. They're putting him in the right situations and asking him to use his legs more, maybe not rely on his arm as much. And when he has to throw it, he's made enough plays for them to win games. So that's a team you got to watch out for. They've got a lot of football left, and they will definitely be around. They'll have a say in who goes to the SEC
Yeah,
championship.
for
So
sure.
it's gonna be fun to watch them.
If they win Saturday night, they are right back in it. It's a nationally televised game.
Absolutely.
Marquee win over LSU. It's in LSU, so they win that game, they're right there. And then if they, like you said, if they win out, they're going to be in the college football playoff, because that would mean that they knocked off Georgia as well. So everything's still in front of them. And in some ways, that early loss almost maybe helped them. That kind of a little bit of the pressure came off. Some of the visibility, like Jalen Milroe, like you said, Tommy Rees, former Notre Dame quarterback and coordinator, first year down there too. They were really kind of mixing and matching and trying to figure things out. So maybe that early loss, just kind of let them hit the reset button a little bit and be like, all right, we're just going to figure this out. Kind of, our defense will win some games for a while, and now they're going to clearly need their offense against LSU because they can, put up a bunch of points. I'm really looking forward to that one. That's the game
that's the game I'm looking forward to the most.
Yeah,
I'm watching that. Like, I'll be glued to that TV at 7:45. Like, let's go Alabama. I will officially say roll tide. I may even text Levi Wallace and just be like, hey, roll tide.
There you go.
I'm definitely cheering for Alabama.
I respect it, and I concur wholeheartedly. Number 7, Texas, like we were just talking about. They play Kansas State. This is one of those. This feels like the Oklahoma game last week, right? Like, you're rolling into Kansas State. It's an 11 a.m. Central Standard Time kickoff. Little sleepy. Oh, we should beat these guys. Careful, Texas, right?
Careful,
like, this is
careful.
like, Kansas State's ranked. They're 23rd. They're alive. They're going to always be a live dog. It feels like they play really well at home always, and it feels like a trap game for Texas.
It could be a trap game, but I think for them, I think they realize there's not enough football left. And when you saw what happened to Oklahoma, you still now have a chance. You run the table. If Oklahoma can get one more loss, now you're in the driver's seat. The question is always going to be, who's playing quarterback for them? Ewers got hurt, so now it's kind of like, all right, what's going to happen? Who's going to be there? We have some young guys in the stable, but are they ready to play? So that's going to be the question of what it looks like. And if that young guy doesn't play well, what type of game plan do you put around him offensively, and more importantly, defensively? If the offense can't score points, how do you slow down Kansas State? Like, can you slow them down enough on defense to overcome for maybe the inexperience of who you're going to have play quarterback this week?
Interesting. The last one-loss team is Oregon, rightly ranked, right below Washington. Oregon's still very live, very dangerous. I kicked myself after the first quarter last week, Marlon, when they were playing Utah, and they were up big already. And Utah was only a 6-point, underdog at home. And it felt like kind of Cinderella had, midnight had come for Utah, backup quarterback. They played really well, but Oregon just looked they outclassed them. Even though it was in Utah, they just looked better.
They outclassed, they out physical. That was one of the things where you talk about Oregon and Utah. Utah is known for being tough and having a physical offensive line, physical defense. They're going to fly around, and they're going to make it very difficult for your offense to score points. They did that early in the season against Florida. They did that in some of their other games. And
Southern Cal, they beat USC.
Southern Cal, they beat USC, doing it, being physical, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, what the heck happened? Like, this Oregon team, it's always about, we talk about who plays well early, and then do you hit your stride at the right moment? And that loss for Oregon really galvanized that team. It really made the team kind of realize, like, listen, yeah, we can score points, but we got to be better on defense. We got to be more physical. We've got to stop people from scoring as many points, because you can't. That was their issue. Like, they kind of approached that Washington game kind of like, anything you can do, I can do better. If you have the ball, I just need to have the ball last, and I'm going to win this game. And you can't rely on that all the time. Their field goal kicker missed, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's it. Like, we're going to lose this game because we thought we put ourselves in the right situation, and it didn't work out for us. And so now they're really trying to make sure they take every possession, one possession at a time, right? Like, they're going to maximize as best they can, play hard defense, hard offense. And I like the way they're playing. And again, you look one up, they're right behind Washington, who's playing really good football. And so now you're like, all right, if we can run the table, what does this look like? If Washington slips up, what does this look like going into that Pac-12 championship?
And that's the other, there's 3 marquee 7:30 games. Oregon, just by the way, I love Bucky Irving, the running back. He's probably my favorite running back in college football. I like the aesthetically, I just like the way he runs. I don't know what it is about him. He's like kind of short and low to the ground. He's like even when how he runs is enjoyable, and then he breaks tackles and he bounces off guys. I just like he's like the prototypical running back that I would have if I was building like a college football team. Washington, like you said, is number 5. They're at USC, 7:30 on ABC. Yep. You're gonna need at least 2 screens for 7:30, my friend.
I've got the iPad ready to go. I'm ready.
There you go. So Washington, you know what? It's funny. Like after last week, I came away thinking to myself, Oregon, even though they lost to them, they might just be better than Washington. Washington is they're not soft, but they're not as physical as Oregon. And, you're relying on Michael Penix and throwing the ball all over the field, which is great, and it's worked, and they're undefeated. But I don't know. I feel like this might be – and Southern Cal, boy, they're due for – I mean, they escaped. They're due for that. Yep. They escaped. I watched that entire game against Cal. The fourth quarter was a complete zoo. And credit to the Cal coach. They scored with about 40 seconds left. They're down 50-49, and he went for 2. And I respect that because you're Cal, and you're not going to match up physically with USC. And Cal was up in that game 43-29. If USC is going to ever put one solid 4 quarters of football together, I would feel like it's going to be this Saturday. So, that's another one.
Saturday. It better be the Saturday because if not, they're going to be out of the top 25. You're looking at whatever bowl game they're going to be projected to go to. But Washington has a gauntlet. Like you've got USC this week, then you've got Utah the following week, then you go to at home, you got Utah, and then you go to Oregon State. So it's not like Washington has because they haven't been playing at their best offensively. Like you think about their last 2 weeks, Stanford put up a lot of points against them. They scored 33. You didn't think that was going to happen.
They escaped against Arizona State
the week before. Yep. They really, you got the 3-point victory against Oregon. So it's not like they've been in those situations where they play top teams like, oh, we put them away. They've got a 3-game gauntlet. It's like, we're going to find out what Washington really is. And so this is why I don't really stress out about the initial rankings because there's a lot of really quality football left in the month of November. And you're going to find out who is really hitting their stride. And Oregon is in the right and perfect position because Washington could run the table or they could lose 2 of those 3 games and be like, okay. Yeah. And then all of a sudden now Oregon is in the driver's seat and they can just run the table and do what they need to do and control their own destiny to get into the college football playoff.
Speaking of cruise control and being in the right spot, the number 4 team, I feel like they're the least talked about undefeated. They seem to have played every game at noon on ABC. It seems like they haven't since the big win against LSU. I feel like every single one of their games has been at noon. They're playing Pitt at 3:30. I saw enough of Pitt last week to realize that this is not a trap game. This is not an upset special. Florida State will win this game, whether it looks good or not. And man, their path to the playoff is wide open because I think it would be a shock at this point if they lost the game.
I think the only team that could probably give them a hiccup would be 2 teams, maybe Miami, depending on which Kane team you get. And then that game against Florida, that's just for bragging, right? So, you don't dismiss or discredit any rivalry game. So they better come with their A game. They can't come out and think, well, Florida has this record. They're going to take it easy. No, they better come in and play. But you're right. They have the best kind of easy. I'm not going to say easy setup, but they have the best schedule set up.
But they can't lose
one. Say, let's run it. They can't lose it. If they lose, it's a done deal because
they're the one team that can't afford it. They're the one team that can't afford it.
Unranked teams in your schedule, so you can't lose anything else. So they've got to be very focused and make sure they come in each game and approach like you control your own destiny. That's my message, guys. We control our own destiny. We have to take this one game at a time. We beat the teams, win the games we're supposed to win, and we're going to win and dominate in all 3 facets, offensively, defensively, and on special teams. And they have the talent everywhere on all sides of the ball to do that. They just have to stay focused enough to do it.
They have the tallest receivers I've ever seen on a college football
team.
Yes, they do.
And they can run, too.
They can run. They're giant.
Yes, they're giant guys. That's a Florida State staple.
Right. All right. So we're going to get to the top 3 here now, and we'll start with the third 7:30 game. This one doesn't need to be on a screen, maybe just being monitored. Michigan at Purdue. I figure this is probably a good time in our podcast to talk about your favorite team up north. And obviously, everybody has an opinion and everybody has speculation. Let's approach it this way. If they did what they're accused of doing, how much of an advantage, as a former player, how much of an advantage do you think it actually is?
It's a huge advantage, and I know you're going to have people on both sides of the spectrum that says, well, that's what everyone tries to do. In the competition of the game, yes, when you go into a game, you're trying to like see if they have certain hand signals. That means they run certain routes. But at no point did we try to, and every time it comes out, there's more information. It just looks very damning like that this was something that was beyond the normal competition level of trying to figure out what they're running so that we can do what we need to do on offense or defense, right? And so when you think about it, I think of it like this, right? Like when you think about what they're accused of doing, it's chess, right? In chess, you're trying to play off the moves. Like, so we're so there's always this chess move on offensive defense. Can I call the right offensive play? Can I get you in a defense that I know I really want to get you in so that I can take advantage of the route combination against that? What they've been able to do is they have the cliff notes for what your check is going to be. And that's what makes it so egregious, where people don't understand, like, well, who cares about the sign? Change your signs up. It's not that simple. You can't just continue to change your sign up each week because you don't have enough time to practice and do all those things. And you, at some point in time, you'll repeat it, right? So they'll have a better chance. But what it does is, when you talk about the NFL is really big on this, right? This is why they crack down so much when you hear about guys maybe gambling. We talk about the integrity of the game. The integrity and the appeal of college football is it's exciting to watch every Saturday or every Thursday or every Friday night when you're playing. And so what happens is now if I know your hand signals mean this, I'm going to call this defense. And I know if I get in this defense that you're going to check, you're going to then change this hand signal and check this. I'm always going to be able to be a step ahead of you to call the right defense or call the right offense to put myself in a better position to win. And that you don't give your other team. It's if I laminated all my hand signals, said, okay, figure it out, then okay. But if it's one-sided and that's the only team, that's where it makes it so difficult. So it's kind of one of those like, all right, the integrity of the game is now coming in question. And so now it's bad. Like you talking about guys on sidelines, like the way you went about doing it and trying to do that, that's what makes it really bad, because now it's like you guys are cheating and you're trying to get hand signals for everybody. It's not in the normal competition of, I have somebody on the sideline like, hey, coach, they raised this card and they ran this play. Like that's the normal competition. That's the way it is. It's well, we did it first. Well, no, like if no one else is doing it, then does it make it fair? Like I'll let people decide it. Like that's fine. Like, and people always want to come back and say, well, it's an Ohio State, Michigan thing. Listen, I'm going to throw shade at Michigan because it's fun. And I can take the ribbings, just like Clarette said, it's fun. I grew up in a time where Ohio State, Michigan, the winner of that game represented the Big Ten in the Rose Bowl. So I love a competitive Michigan. As much as you want to be like, I can't, you want to see Ohio State win a game, the Big Ten is better when Ohio State and Michigan are both good. And so I had no problem saying they beat our butts. They ran the ball down our throats. They did this. But then if you find out that it was because they hacked into the database, they got this, they got that, they did, like, then you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? And some people are trying to say that we're ducking, they're not afraid. That's the thing where that game will take care of itself. Like, you're not going to be able to hide if you're Ohio State. But what they're accused of really goes back to it's the integrity of the game. And really who's going to monitor that right now is Vegas.
Vegas is the best.
The integrity of the game is at stake. Like, if I can't get an accurate spread, if I can't get this, and this is why people are up in arms. Like, people don't understand like the impact and the dominoes that could fall off of this. And I don't know how you fix it. Well, I know how you fix it. I think what's going to end up happening is you get rid of the signs, you get rid of cards, and you just go to what the NFL has. You put a microphone in the middle linebacker and the quarterbacks and say, listen, I can tell you what to call when they get in this formation. You have up until 18, 19 seconds before you can talk. So that means teams are going to have to rush and get to the line faster to get to their checks. And so I think that'll settle that. But I don't know how you punish them and what the punishment should be if it's found out that everything they've done is true. I don't really know what you do to that, but
I mean, there's some competing narratives there, right? Like there's the fairness, the competition. It seems to me I'm pretty neutral in this fight. It was systemic, right? Like they made a point to go, if you're reading lips, you always see the offensive coordinators now with the play card up at their thing. And if you can read lips, if you can steal signs in baseball in the park without using video equipment, that's all to me part of the game. That's fair. That's trying to gain an advantage. I mean, that's totally fine. But when you take an assistant and you buy him a ticket to a game that you're not involved in, and he sits on the opposite sideline with an iPhone, I I mean, that's clearly, at the very least, it goes against the spirit of the game, and it's probably just an out and out, violation. It's interesting though. There's a lot of money riding on Michigan being alive for the college football playoff.
Absolutely.
So, man, it's a tough one. I personally would like to see Jim Harbaugh get the book thrown at him. Like, I think this is one of those things that could just damage college football, and it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder how many of their wins the last couple of years were legit, and how many of them, were aided by. I mean, they've been blowing teams out, and even though they haven't had a down week yet, right? And it just makes you wonder. It's like, hey, you know what? They haven't had a dud. They haven't had the sleepy game. No, they've been waxing people 55-0 and all. And it's like, well, yeah, sure. If you got the playbook, I mean, I guess you could probably be there.
They're going to run. Yeah, I know
Marlon,
what to get to.
You and I could probably suit up for somebody and be a little bit more competitive right now if we had their plays. Like, that would, it's such a big advantage, for a team. And you feel bad for the players because obviously it's not their choice.
Yeah, it's not their choice. But then, it's. And some people say, well, Harbaugh didn't know this guy. I highly doubt that this guy went rogue on his own to the level of he did. And then what makes it even more is the arrogant way that you go about it, like to leave the paper trail that was left.
Yeah.
So that you were doing is like, okay, like, did you not think that somebody was going to figure this out? And really what it is their own people got mad. Somebody from their own camp told on them. Like, it's not like Ohio State was like, well, Michigan's doing this or this is happening. Their own coach, somebody from their own coaching staff is the one who kind of blew the lid off of this. So even that person knew, hey, you know what? In the spirit of fairness and competition, this isn't right. Like, this is on a whole different level. And again, I don't know what's going to happen. So I want, and I'll say it here. You can hear it from me because I'm 100%. I believe Scarlet and Gray. I have the T-shirt that says it. I have the picture that I can put on my social media as I bleed Scarlet and Gray. But I want a competitive Michigan. I want a competitive Penn State. It's better for the conference as a whole when those teams are really good and there's parity. But at what cost do you get the parity? At what cost do you put the entire jeopardy of the entire conference and the entire program? That's what you're looking at right here. And I don't think their fans really think about or thinking of it as the totality of what does it really mean in the big picture. I mean, you think about Ohio State when we talk about Jim Tressel and what we were accused of, and all we talked about was him lying and knowing that maybe Terrell Pryor shouldn't have played because he had sold some things and got it. So we talked about selling your own apparel and your own memorabilia and getting a tattoo. And they vacated wins. He ended up losing his job. Pryor became ineligible, like all those things. So what are they going to do if you find out that this is a whole different level of Spygate at the collegiate level? Like, what does that look like? I don't know. But I know they need to figure it out soon, because what are you going to do? You're going to let them play games. And if they run the table and win a national championship, and then you come back and say, hey, they cheated, do you make them vacate all the wins?
And what does that mean?
That's where the ramifications really come in. Like, you have to kind of say, we need to make a decision sooner rather than later, because it's not fair to those kids who are trying to. First of all, let's think about the kids in Michigan. It's not fun. It's not fair to them to kind of allow them to kind of have this. We won a national championship. Oh, but we're going to take it back from you because of some things that the adults did that was supposed to protect the integrity of the program. So you need to figure it out now, because it has ramifications. And the NCAA, they're notoriously known for dragging their feet.
Yep.
But how do you vacate wins that will happen next year or after they get done with their investigation? Oh, we looked into it. You got to vacate your wins from 2 years ago.
Who cares?
You got to vacate your bowl victory. Who cares? Like, so that's where it really comes into it. Like, nobody's going to be like, hey, thank you. You kind of want to know now what it looks like. So
it feels like there has to be there has to be a resolution before the Ohio State Michigan game. Like, especially,
I don't know if you can. It's so much stuff that's coming out, right? Like, what's true, what's not true. You have to sift through all that. But make no mistake about it. If people think that Jim Harbaugh didn't know and doesn't know what's going on, that's just the whole rule of, listen, you don't want to know how I'm doing this, but this is what I'm doing. But you don't know how I'm doing this for. You can have your own culpability. Like, hey, look, nope, that's out. You're out. You're good.
And
like,
he's
you
a control
be
freak.
A part of that, right? Like,
and he's a control freak enough that there's no way that he doesn't know exactly what's going on his sideline. I mean, the idea that he doesn't. Speaking of that, I actually just got a text. Speaking of legendary coaches and control freaks, Bobby Knight just died.
Oh man.
Yeah. I just got a text saying that Bobby Knight just passed away, and he was one of those iconic coaches that kind of crossed over from football or from basketball to football. There's obviously that famous highlight of him chucking the chair
I
all the way
remember chucking
across
the chair.
the,
Yes.
and he was one of those guys. Man, could you imagine him now in like the NIL world and the
No,
transfer
I could
portal?
not.
Oh
I
my
could not.
goodness.
No.
Talk about a dinosaur. I mean, he might kill somebody if they took the
Yeah.
money, or imagine if his players are making $1 million a year to play at Indiana or something.
He definitely is an old school coach, and I grew up with coaches like that. Like he had a different style, and I don't think his style would definitely not translate to this game of just the way he talked to players, the way he berated players. It was that tough love, and that's
Did you ever
not
feel like
what
you
will
might
go.
get did you ever feel like a coach might get physical with you?
I've never felt that a coach would get physical with me. I mean, I had a coach like, "Do you want to hit me? You want to fight me? What's up? Like, we can go down." I'm like, I thought about it. Like, am I crazy? Do I want to lose my scholarship? Like, this is no. I'm like,
Okay.
I'm going over here, coach. Like, you got it. I'm good. I have nothing to say, coach. But I grew up in a time like that where coaches really did talk to you, and the ramifications that it sometimes can have on a young player's psyche, especially if you're making a mistake and they're like, what are you dumb? What are you stupid? Because that's the term and the phrase they would use. And I've had coaches that were like, hey, I had a really good coach and I respected him a lot, but he said some things like, hey, can you say that? Are you allowed to even say that now? Like, no,
Probably
you
couldn't
can't.
say it now. Probably couldn't say it
But
now what you could say back
right, some
then.
of
I
the
mean,
curse words
even
that I got, yeah,
yeah.
and the threats of taking your scholarship.
You think Karl Mock would fly in 2023 on an NFL sideline? Probably not.
Probably not.
probably,
Absolutely not. Yeah.
probably not. So obviously we got two teams left here. Georgia, they got a tough test. They go to Missouri,
Yeah.
who's ranked number 12. That's a 3:30 game. Is that one of those games that you'll be watching and cheering for Missouri just to get a knock on Georgia? I mean, that feels like a important game for the Buckeyes, just in terms of knocking your opponents down.
No, I mean, I wouldn't root. I want Georgia to be good. We lost to them last year, so
Okay.
from a competitor standpoint, you want the opportunity to go back and if it all plays out right and you can run the table and they run the table, you want the opportunity to play them again. Like you want to come back and show like, hey, we're good, and we want to be able to have the opportunity to avenge what we started last year that you got. You knocked out Marvin Harrison Jr. And that was like the pivotal turning point in that game. And they went on and was able to win that game. And so as a competitor, you're like, I want my chance of to play against them again. Realistically, I mean, they've got a gauntlet too. They've got Missouri, then they got Ole Miss, then they go to Tennessee before they end their season at Georgia Tech. So that's no cakewalk for them.
And then the SEC championship game.
Yeah, and then the SEC championship. So they've got a very physical schedule up with them, and the main thing for all these teams, including Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and the teams we mentioned and Washington, is who can stay the healthiest. Now can you stay the healthiest that you need to be? They're already starting to play really good football. Can you continue on that trend of good football and then stay healthy through the rest of the season? Because that will determine how far you can go. So can you keep your quarterback right? Can you keep your running back right? And if somebody gets healthy, do you have depth behind it to come in and there's no drop off?
Ohio State and Michigan have a clear advantage over the SEC teams that, frankly, the Big 12 championship game is not going to be the challenge for an Ohio State or a Michigan playing Iowa or Wisconsin. I don't know if you saw, but Iowa has already preemptively fired the offensive coordinator at the end of the season, Kirk Ferentz's son, which I found hilarious that they're going to let him coach out the rest of the year, but then tell him, goodbye, because he was obligated to score 25 points a game, which they haven't even come close to. So this weekend, Marlon, I'm going to point you to the Iowa Northwestern game. They're playing it at Wrigley. They're playing it at Wrigley Field in Chicago. Okay. The over-under is 29.5. And I still would bet the under.
They might not even get 24. I bet the under too. That might be a
it's
10-9 game.
It's the lowest total since 2000 in any college football game. And this is lower than Air Force. It's lower than Air Force and Army, which is crazy to me. If you think about it, 29.5. I got to tell you, there's probably no amount of money that I would go to sit through that game, even though it's at Wrigley Field. Like what a tough watch. Speaking of tough watches, your Buckeyes travel to the football hotbed of Piscataway, New Jersey, to play against the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. I mean, Marlon, come on now. Like this is a stay healthy, get right, get back on the bus. Nobody's hurt. Let's move on game, right?
Absolutely. This is the can you come in and hit on all cylinders right off the bat so I can get up big and play some guys who might need to get in the game so you get some of your twos in. I want you getting some more experience, and you think about Ohio State this is a different team when you have a healthy TreVeyon Henderson. Like their run game last week was explosive. That was missing. We kept talking about what's missing from Ohio State and their offense, and it was the inconsistent play at quarterback. McCord. Now he didn't have his best game last week. Like, he had some turnovers, made some bad decisions. I still want to see him set his feet more because I think that's where he really gets in trouble when he doesn't get his throwing motion starts with the feed and then get the compact motion that you need and just stay square so you can make all the throws. When he gets out of whack, the ball sails on him and that's where he gets in trouble. So I would love to see him just continue to grow in that area and get better in that. But TreVeyon Henderson, I mean, man, he made a difference. Like they were ripping off runs that you hadn't seen them with explosive runs like that until he came back. And so I think if you can get that momentum and get him back, get him going. Now, unfortunately, Maya Williams is done for the rest of the season. He had surgery on an undisclosed injury. So that's a big hit. So now it's kind of who else? You have TreVeyon, you have Chip, train him, who's going to be there. So now it's like, who's that third back you can go to? And so that's going to be something that you want to maybe try to figure out in this game. Who can I play? Who can look good? But definitely you want to get them in early because really the next test that you have is later on, and you want to make sure you're firing all cylinders and you're healthy.
You need to keep Marvin Harrison in bubble wrap for the next 3 weeks because you got Rutgers, Michigan State at home, and Minnesota at home. And I know, former player, you're going to tell me that everybody's a live dog and blah 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 blah. But realistically, I mean, there's no. I don't see a path where any of those three teams even challenge Ohio State. Do you think there's ever a game plan consideration to maybe, keeping guys like Marvin healthy? Obviously, you want to give him the ball early. You want to get him up. You want to score. You want to get up early. But is there ever a, hey, we don't want to target him 15 times in a game like this?
I think it's more of you got to go with what you have, right? I think they have injuries in their receiving corps, right? So when you look at it, Fleming has been in and out. So they just Ibuka in and out. You just haven't had the complementary pieces that you thought you were going to have all season long. So you're hoping some of those get healthy. I think the benefactor from all this is Carnell Tate has shown signs that he can be the next person to step into that role and maybe get an expanded role in the offense. And they've been going to him more. But yeah, you've got to figure out how to minimize his opportunities to get hit. And I think they do a really good job of moving him around, getting him in places, getting him off the ball where guys can't put their hands on him all the time, getting him where he can get some rubs and come across where it's a foot race and he's going to win those foot races. So as long as you continue to do that, I think they'll be fine. But yes, you want to find somebody else. I think Cade Stover had no catches or one catch last week. You got to find a way to get him more involved in the offense because that will take some of the pressure off of always finding 18. But yeah, he's a big component. And having TreVeyon back helps. Now it's I can throw the ball to TreVeyon. I can do some different things. I don't always have to maybe focus on him and where we know he's going to get double coverage and everyone's looking at 18. Like, where is he? So hopefully you can kind of figure that out and get your game plan early. And you still don't know who the backup quarterback is, right? I think, we had the injury earlier on our own backup quarterback. And it's like, all right, if McCord goes down, what does that look like? So you really want to get McCord and get that offense rolling early so you can kind of get what it looks like, get your backup behind and get that experience in there because he doesn't have too much.
Yeah, you got a 3-game little stretch here of not preseason football, but really, really tweak your roster, get some experience to some guys. I'll just remind you that you are one DJ Brown interception away from not being the number one team in college football. And I have a pro comparison that might make you cringe. Watching Kyle McCord, he kind of reminds me of Mac Jones. And I don't say that lightly. I'm sorry, Marlon. And hopefully you that's in your head on Saturday, at noon. Just watch him. Like I don't know what it is about him. He reminds me of Mac Jones. Game manager, But sometimes there's just some inexplicable. I know he's young, but there is some inexplicable plays where it's like, God, Kyle, like I found myself rooting for them more this year than ever before because of the show and my connection with you. And I'll just shake my head at sometimes. I'm like, ooh, what an ugly decision that was. And Mac Jones is prone to those like just true head scratchers.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call him in comparing to Mac Jones by no stretch of the imagination. But I could see how you're like, hey, the you can question the decision making. But think about all the teams that have been plagued by young quarterbacks who make really bad decisions. That's the issue that you have when you have a young quarterback, because you don't know how they're going to respond, and especially if they just aren't that well at being able to understand what defense is and how teams are going to stem to it and how they're going to scheme him. Sometimes you just have a head scratch, like, dude, like there were so many times like he's open in the flat, get the ball out. Now it's boom, boom, bang, back foot down, up, linebackers dropping it to where you want to throw it to the guy sitting at the sticks. That's a first down. You continue to drive. That's all you need to do. So sometimes you just got to go back to the film and really help guys get it. And you really can't rush the maturation process. That's what the sucky thing about college football is. Sometimes you hope guys would see it faster and get it sooner. I know I've been there before, so I know how it is. It's just sometimes they've got to go through and you got to take the lumps. Alabama's taking theirs. We've been fortunate where we've had a really good defense that's been able to keep teams low scoring and not give up big plays to really
and a little bit of luck.
You got to trust him. You always got to have luck in college football. Yep. Every team has had some type of luck in the college football season. And so do I think Ohio State stays at number one in the college football playoff? No. I think when it's all said and done, if they run the table, they probably end up at 2. I think Georgia is going to have some really good wins here. It's an opportunity to have some really good wins and then get to the SEC championship, and they could be playing a really good team on the other side. So what does that look like? Who do they play? And it could be a top 10 showdown as well. So yeah, I think for the first one, you can make the argument who it is. I never stressed whether Ohio State was 1, 2, or 3. Really, all you want to be is in the top 4. You want to be in the top 4 because if you do what you're supposed to do, you at worst, you stay in the position that you're at now. Like, you're not going to go any lower. Nobody's going to jump you if you run the table. And so that's the main thing of all those 4 teams that are here now. You don't worry about position. It's the first one. It never looks the same at the end of it. People jockey and flip positions all the time.
And it's not as if, I know Georgia's undefeated in the 2-time champs, but they don't strike me as one of those dominant Alabama or even Georgia from 2 years ago where you're like, oh, man, I don't even want to be 4. Like, the year Notre Dame made it and they had to play Clemson. You didn't want to be 4. You wanted to be 2 or 3 so you could avoid that number 1. So even if, they slide in at 4 and you have to play Georgia, it's not, to me, there's no dominant team. All these teams seem to be pretty equal at the top. And you said, Ohio State probably won't stay at number 1 after the next, even if they win, the next couple of weeks. But really, who cares? Just
look at their schedule. Like, the next test they won't, if they run the table, the next test they will have will be in Ann Arbor. Yep. Right. That's it. And so what'll end up happening is those teams will either be 2 and 3. And Georgia will probably end up being number 1, or Florida State, depending on how it looks, if Georgia falters. Now you're like, okay, what does this look like? Because whoever wins that will then have the opportunity of, do I have an outside chance? So the winner or the loser of that game will probably drop no lower than 5 to 5, right? And so now you get the chance to say, how does it look? How does it shake out with all the conference championships? If Georgia was to lose the SEC championship, then okay, a 1-loss Georgia, what does that look like, right? If Florida State loses the ACC championship, then you could make a case for an Ohio State if they were to lose that game in Ann Arbor, or Michigan if they were to lose that game in Ann Arbor, to then jump back into the top 4 because of somebody faltering. So again, I know I'm really not talking to too many maize and blue fans up there, but again, I don't put too much credence in this and be like, oh my gosh, like this is no, it's the first poll. Somebody's got to be number 1. They probably won't be there. Ohio State's definitely probably going to drop to 2 after these. Even if they run the table, they're going to go to 2. Because teams are going to have more quality wins against top 15, top 10 opponents going forward. So you could always make the argument of, hey, they've got 2 top 10 victories. They've got 1 top 10 game left that they need to win. Then you can say yes. And then they've got to win the Big Ten championship. Then you can make the argument of, should they be 1? Should they be 2? And they need to run the table. So I think Ohio State eventually ends up being number 2 when it's all said and done, when they go into that game up in Ann Arbor.
Enjoy your last year of the Rutgers, Michigan State, Minnesota gauntlet before the West Coast teams come to join the Big Ten. It does feel like the Big Ten needs a bit of infusion of of different teams, because boy, the bottom of the Big Ten is rough. Like it's just rough. You know,
it's tough to watch sometimes.
It's tough to watch. It's not entertaining. It's not really all that competitive. And it's like, man, it's such a top heavy league right now that, you know, I think it does a disservice to Michigan and Ohio State, because if they do lose one, it's tough to make the argument that they still deserve to get in. At least Ohio State has the Notre Dame win. Michigan doesn't have any out of conference. I feel like if Michigan loses to Ohio State, they're out. Like, I don't see any way they get in because they haven't beaten anybody.
Yeah, I mean,
they'll beat Penn State, but that's it.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, they've got to beat Penn State though. That's the biggest thing. It's not like Penn State is going to lay down and say, "Okay, here we go." Like, you run all over us. So, you know, that's going to be an interesting game to watch. So, yeah, they've definitely got some bumps on their schedule coming up. And I think as long as Penn State continues to win, they're going to climb up in the rankings, because that's what they do in college football, right? Like, you keep winning, you got to go up, and teams are going to lose ahead of you. So naturally, you're going to move up in spaces and move up in the poll, and that's going to solidify those late victories that you have over ranked teams to give you the better strength of schedule at the end. But really, Michigan only has Penn State that'll be ranked, and then they have Ohio State on the schedule that'll be ranked. So that's kind of where it's going to fall for them. If they end up winning out, you really will only have, if they lose a game to Ohio State, then you only have one top 10 win. Like, you're done. Like, how do you make that argument unless Florida State loses? So I could see a scenario where Michigan gets to 5, kind of like Ohio State. They lost last year. Michigan won, but they ended up dropping to 5, and USC lost. And that's how Ohio State was able to get into that 4th spot, just because of the way it shook out. You needed some help. So I could see a scenario where they put that and say, okay, Michigan, we're going to give you an opportunity, and then let's see how it plays out.
Well, there you go. Any final thoughts for us before we take off?
It's going to be fun. So thank you all for listening. I hope you guys had a wonderful, we had some snow up here in Buffalo, but you know, it's getting into the holiday season. So spend time with your family, watch a lot of football. This is where the games really count. And we'll see what happens with Michigan and all their troubles. And as always, go Buckeyes, because, you know, I bleed scarlet and gray. Go Buckeyes.
Please like and subscribe to the show on YouTube, Cover One, and the Cover One College Football Network. And we're going to be back next week. We'll react to these games, and then obviously the next college football playoff rankings that come out. Thanks, Marlon.
Thanks, Josh.